I am really excited about this passage we're going to look at today. And it is such a crucial passage. It has something to say for all of us as we make choices. And yet I can feel the tug on this side of me, just sort of the sadness of what we share. So I just want you to know I'm going to do the best I can with the passage that we have in front of us. And if I'm not as expressive as I really want to be, I think I'm going to throw my excuse that direction. In September of 1774, this is 2 years before the Declaration of Independence, the Continental Congress was formed. This was way before the Constitution and way before Bunker Hill and Concord and Lexington and the 7-Year War. 12 of the colonies sent delegates to Philadelphia to how are we going to do this? The Declaration of Independence had not even been written yet, but they sensed this is where we were heading. And as the delegates from the 12 different colonies, all except Georgia, convened, one of the men from Massachusetts said, gave a motion at the beginning that we should start with prayer. And they agreed to that. And the fellow that they tasked to do that was an Anglican pastor. And he read from Psalm 35, that talked about how that we need God to deal with our enemies, and we're trying to strengthen us and help us with this. And then he prayed for about 10 minutes. And back in those days, of course, they didn't have recordings of all this, but one of the things that these guys did was they had people that took copious notes of what was said, because they sensed that the effect of this was going to be historical. When the fellow got done 10 minutes later, most of the delegates there were in tears over what he had shared and what he'd prayed, and some of them were on their knees. That began as they tried to, how are we going to do this as our colonies here? How are we going to form a government? They began each day with prayer in the hopes of learning how to do that. And that became one of the regular features of our Congress, which happens every day when they meet. They start with prayer. I'm aware of two brothers that have a business, or they used to have a shared business, and the business was really on the basis of a verbal handshake and upon sort of the common, they're both sons of their father and mother. But then times really got tough for one of the brothers financially, and he wasn't sure if he was going to make it, and he made a decision that he was going just to take the business. And the two brothers had some type of legal agreement that they had signed. But for the most part, the way that it operated historically was the two of them were co-owners of the business. But when push came to shove, the one brother decided that he was going to stand up on that legal piece of paper and pushed his brother aside. Unfortunately, that is pretty common in our world, not just locally, but all over the world. There are times in life when we are faced with decisions. And some of those decisions can be life-altering decisions. And we're going to see that with Abraham and Lot today. 2 weeks ago, we started the story of Lot with the beginnings, faith's beginnings, and God beginning to lead this man into a life of faith. And we will see how God works in his life all through all the course of his life until he dies. This element that becomes so pivotal, like an anchor in him that helps guide him in the right direction, keeps him moving forward. Last week, we looked at faith's tent and altar, which are the two metaphors that describe Abraham. The tent is a metaphor for in our world today of heaven is our home. This world is not our home. And it's not just the place of home, but what we desire in our heart, the satisfaction we yearn for, that sense of connection, that our life makes a difference. And what the tent represents is no matter how good some of those things may be for us in the short term, in the long term, nothing in this world can satisfy our hearts except God. The tent represents that. The altar, when Abraham moved from place to place with the tent, he built an altar. And the altar had several different functions. Sometimes it was a place of confession and cleansing. Sometimes it was a place of commitment. Sometimes, I think most of the time, it was a place of recentering himself, getting his bearings again, his spiritual bearings about what was most important as he moved forward. When it comes to decisions, and usually big decisions, one of the things that is so perplexing about life is that sometimes you graduate from high school or you graduated from college and you are faced with some really, really big decisions. And yet at that point in life, we have so little life experience upon which to draw. And some of these decisions that we make may be really good decisions that have some really long-term blessings to them. But unfortunately, some of the decisions that we make have some terrible long-term consequences to them that we never saw coming. And in our passage today with Abraham and Lot, we have both of these approaches illustrated so well. Abraham is going to be the one that makes the wise decision, the godly decision. Lot is going to make what looks like to him the sensible decision, which turns out to be a catastrophic decision, not only for him, but for his wife, his children, his future, and everything that he owns. Abraham, as we looked at last week, had gotten to the Canaan, the promised land, and there was a drought there. And instead of asking God, what do you want me to do regarding the drought? How are we going to live? There's not enough pasture. Instead of asking God and dealing with that, he panics and he runs to Egypt. I've done that in my life before. I've panicked and run to Egypt thinking I know better and there's something good there. But as we saw, when he gets to Egypt, everything starts to go south and he loses so much of what's important. He loses his name and his reputation. He loses his courage and his character. And he ends up being chastened by Pharaoh and deported. Get out of here. Please leave and back. And when he comes back to Canaan, this is where we pick up the story, he is a very humbled man. And he goes back to the tent, living in the tent, and he goes back to the altar. A lot of times in life, there are times when we've made really crappy decisions, and we end up having to face the consequences of that. And one of the things that happens is regret. If only I had known better. If only I had listened. If only I had gotten some counsel about this. I thought I knew exactly what to do, and I never considered this or this or this. It's very easy for us to be like that. Now, Abraham had just experienced that. And it had a very humbling, redemptive factor in his character. Lot, his nephew, had yet to experience this, as we'll see in our story. We pick up the story in Genesis 13, starting with verse 5. Lot, who was moving about with Abraham, also had flocks and herds and tents. But the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together, and quarreling arose between Abraham's herders and Lot's. The Canaanites and Perizzites were also living in the land at the time. Now, by the end of his life, Lot is going to be considered a righteous man. But at the beginning of the story, he's anything but righteous. He is sort of your typical worldly man that thinks like a worldly man does. And here, the two men are faced with a test. Tests are a part of life, and tests expose what's really inside of us. In this case, the test has to do with money, pasture land, and their businesses. The picture that Moses paints as he writes this story is the two men walking up to the top of a hill and looking out in a panoramic view all around them. And they see all different kinds of terrain around them, water, some green, some not. And each of them make their choices. And they're very, very different choices for very different considerations, which we'll look at. My mentor in Texas used to say that when we're trying to make big decisions, he said there are really three things that we should take into account. What's right before God, what's right towards people, and what's the wise decision to make. These are three great categories to think about big decisions. What's right by God, what's right by people, and what's wise there. Micah 6:8 is sort of puts these three considerations together. He has showed you, O man, what is good. What does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And there are the three questions that come from that. What is right by God? In other words, what's holy here? What's right? What is right by people? What is just and merciful? What is the right thing to do, righteous? So here we have verse 8 again. Abraham said to Lot, let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herders and mine, for they are close relatives. Is not the whole land before you? And you can imagine them standing up on this hilltop, looking out. To the east is the Jordan River Valley. To the west, far off, is the Mediterranean Sea. The south is the desert. The north is up toward modern-day Lebanon and up towards Iran. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. Now that's Abraham's approach to this decision. On the inside of your handout, I like just to sort of hit the pause button on the story and just think about when you and I make big decisions like this, what are the things to consider? In my experience in talking to Christians, and when I was a young Christian, what's God's will is the top of the list. But there are a bunch of other considerations that I think are important that we should at least think about. Here's a list of some of them. What is really true about life, about human nature and purpose and our destiny? What really matters? These things should factor into the kind of decision that we make. What are our real values? What's really important to us? What is God's larger story in our lives? What is He trying to tell through our family or through our life or through our marriage or through my life? We want to honor God with our lives, our character, our name, our reputation, and testimony, and the effect on important relationships. Those are important considerations if you're trying to make a wise decision about something. Now, in contrast to that, and we've all been on this side of this making decisions, sort of like Lot, there are foolish considerations, and I have just some of them written in your handout and on the screen here. The grass is always greener elsewhere. We all have this sort of idealization of life somewhere else would be easier. We're sort of naive, and the Proverbs calls this the simpleton. The simpleton thinks it's easier somewhere else. If only I could be somewhere else. Assuming we have all the information we need. It's very easy to do that. In John 7:24, Jesus says, do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment. It's not good to assume I have all the facts I need. There's no need for counsel. You hardly ever hear that out in the world. We trust our desires. We trust our feelings. We underestimate our own fallen nature. We are naive about the effect on relationships. And then the love of what the world could give me, and that's in air quotes there, because it never really gives me in the long term what I'm looking for. Status, fame, wealth, recognition, validation, etc. So we have sort of two ways of making decisions. There's a wise way to make decisions and wise considerations, and a foolish way to make decisions and foolish considerations. Now I want to come back to Abraham's factors on why he decided what he wanted to do, what he decided. Let me read again verse 8. Abraham said to Lot, let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herders and mine. We are close relatives. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. Now, there are three things that strike me here that are important. Moses, as he records this episode, includes what almost seems like a throwaway line. The Canaanites and the Perizzites, this is back in verse 7, were also in the land. Now, why did Moses include that? Didn't have anything to do with the decision, did it? And yet when I think about this, I think you and I don't make these decisions in isolation. There are people around us that are lost. And some of these people are watching you and me like a hawk to see what we're going to do, how we're going to respond to a situation. And I think one of the considerations there when we're making decisions is that very thing. You and I have an opportunity to be, as Jesus said, the light of the world to people who live in darkness, as Jesus put it. And one of the ways that light shines is how or what considerations we make our decisions on. A second thing for him was we are close relatives. And it wasn't just immediate family, but extended family had something to do with how Abraham saw this decision. And it wasn't just a decision for the moment or for the next few months or a few years, but long-term considerations. And you probably know families where one awful decision that seemed like the right decision to somebody had long-term consequences on family relationships. It's very, very easy to happen. The third thing that he made a decision on, a consideration, was a word you hardly ever hear in our culture. It's the word deference. Deference. The only time I can ever remember hearing that word deference is in church. Deference. He deferred to Lot. He saw an opportunity to be a blessing to Lot, that he was willing to take whatever was second here in order to further Lot and his family. Deference. Years ago, when we first moved here, back before even we had worship, Mindy and I were meeting people every day for months. And one of the funnest times for me was a Tuesday night tennis group that I was in, tennis and pizza, where all the guys were attorneys and all the women worked in the legal field except me. I stumbled upon this group one of the first Tuesdays we were here over at North Lake Tennis Club. And there were 7 people there. They needed one more for mixed doubles. What an amazing thing. I said, yes, I'll play. They had no idea I was a pastor. And I had no idea what they were. So we finished mixed doubles, and they said, Seth, you want to go over to Lamppost Pizza? We get pizza and beer afterwards. I said, I'd love to. So we get over to Lamppost Pizza, the one that used to be on Barranca. And they ordered pizza and some couple of salads thing, and they had a couple of pitchers of beer out there. And I ordered my Diet Pepsi. And as we're getting to know each other, I find out the other 3 guys are lawyers. The 4 ladies work in the legal fund. And then they said, what do you do, Seth? I said, I'm a pastor. And it got very quiet. And one of them, this was so startling to them, they said, of a church? I said, yes. And it was almost like they were trying to figure out, what are we going to do with this? Well, what church is it? I said, well, I don't have a church. And they started laughing. A pastor without a church, that's great, Seth. What are you going to do, start one? I said, yes. I've never heard of that. As if Christopher Columbus came over here and Irvine Presbyterian was already built. Well, what's the name of the church? I said, I don't know. We just got here. A pastor without a church without a name. And apparently I passed some kind of test because they said, hey, we do this every Tuesday night. Would you like to join us? I said, I would love to. Well, after that, I found out all the guys were attorneys except me, and the ladies worked in the legal field. So about week 3 of tennis, we're at there, and one of the ladies notices, she says, Seth, I noticed that you don't drink beer. You get your Diet Pepsi. Do you not drink beer because you're a pastor? And I said, no, that's not the reason. Well, why? Why don't you drink beer? I said, well, there are 2 reasons. The first is when I was in college, I was close to becoming an alcoholic. And I had been around a few social alcoholics, including my parents, and that kind of scared me. I thought I could see the propensity for that. And it sort of got me to questioning, what am I doing with my life? I was age 20. I had everything I always thought it'd take to make me happy, and yet there was something missing. I couldn't figure out what it was. There was this growing sense of emptiness. And to make a long story short, I ended up becoming a real Christian. I found Jesus Christ. And what I discovered was I really didn't need alcohol anymore. I found a joy and a peace inside of me that was just so satisfying. And they looked at me like I was just some strange person, alien from Mars. And somebody said, well, what's the second reason you don't drink? Well, the second reason is because again, in college, I had a bunch of friends who just were like me. And our fraternity, we called ourselves the 40 drunks, and which is not a Greek term for Greek life. And I wanted my friends to see that Jesus Christ really made a difference in my life, that I really didn't need alcohol anymore. You could. Well, the Bible says you can drink, right? I said, yes, in moderation. Just don't get drunk. But I wanted my friends to know that they could give up alcohol too. They didn't have to go down that road. They didn't have to go to the end of that road and experience the misery of that road and the broken relationships of that road necessarily. It could be different, and it could start now. And it got very quiet around the table, and they could not wrap their head around that concept, that I would defer something that was a right to do, drinking in moderation, for the benefit of somebody else. Well, you have the right to drink. Shouldn't you just go ahead and do it? They could not, zero ability to comprehend that. I said, this is not something that I'm giving up. This is something I want to do for the sake of my friends. Could not understand that. Well, you should have the right. You have the right to do that. You could. That's what Abraham does here regarding Lot. We saw what Abraham sees, his considerations. Let's look at what Lot sees, and then we'll look at what Lot doesn't see. Verse 10, Lot looked around and saw. What did he see? That the whole plain of the Jordan towards Zoar was well watered. He looked to the east, and down that hill was the Jordan River Valley, the Jordan coming from the north, out of the Sea of Galilee, down where he was, continuing on down to the Dead Sea. Palm trees, abundant pasture land is what he saw. It was well watered. That's the first thing he says. Like the garden of the Lord. Now here, the writer's not making just a physical description. He's describing something internally inside of Lot as he looks at this. He imagines what this could be. The garden of the Lord, the Garden of Eden. Like, the third thing he sees, the land of Egypt, where he had been with his uncle, Abraham. The splendor, the money, the wealth, all of that, living in a house, fascinated Lot. And there was something that went inside of him, and he grasped onto that as if this is life itself. He may not have consciously thought that, but that's what happened as the story unfolds. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Verse 11, so Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out toward the east. The two men parted company. Abraham lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near a city out that way called Sodom. Now the people of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. Lot sees the things that tantalize him, that draw him. John, in the first letter of John, says, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Those are the things that tend to grip every one of us at some point. Proverbs 12:15 says, the way of fools seems right to them, but a wise man listens to advice. My pastor in Texas used to say, you can't pick problem-free living, but sometimes you can pick your problems. And Lot without knowing it, just picked a whole slew of problems that were going to come his way. There's no element of asking Abraham for, what do you think is a good idea? There's no him talking to God and praying about this. He just sees what he wants and he goes for it. That's what Lot saw. Now, what did Lot not see when he's trying to make this decision? And there are 5 important things that strike me. Proverbs 15:22 says, plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed. What he didn't see was the city. He saw Sodom, but he didn't know the effect of Sodom or what was going on in Sodom. Moses writes that it was a city that was wicked and sinning greatly, and what he did not know or what he did not consider was the moral cesspool that was going on in that city that would eventually bring about its ending. We'll look at that in a few more weeks. The second thing he didn't see was coming judgment upon that city, which would cost him the life of his wife and his future family and everything that he owned. The third thing he didn't see, was what was God's will in this? What do you want me to do, God? Fourth, he did not see the deceptive allure of what his eyes were telling him and the message to grab it. He did not recognize that about what he saw or about himself. And the fifth thing he didn't see was he didn't see himself. He wasn't aware of his own weaknesses. And Moses writes, so Lot chose for himself. Now, when I think about this, over the years of many years of being a pastor, I've talked to tons of people, many in our church and many outside of our church, who face all kinds of big decisions, and they want me to sit down with them and to help them think through things. And I really enjoy doing that. But what I've observed is Lot is not by himself. There are a lot of people like Lot that walk around Irvine and central Orange County. And so I have a list here of the kinds of things of how when lost people lift up their eyes, like Abraham and like Lot, what are the considerations that go through their minds? What are the real considerations? And I've listed 5 of them in your handout. The first is everybody likes to believe that they're just interested in the facts. I just want the facts of this. But what people do not see is that facts are really not as important as we like to believe they are. Because every one of us has a bias regarding facts. We see what we want to see, and we hear what we want to hear. We don't see what we don't want to see, and we don't hear what we don't want to hear. And so facts become an excuse-making exercise to justify what we already intuitively know we want to do. But we like to stand behind facts. The second thing is feelings. And in our world today, feelings are the trump card. They are the big thing. You want to do, feelings are authoritative about this. When it comes to faith, for the most part, faith is irrelevant to most, or even if it's on the list, it is way down the list. I hardly ever hear a lost person say, I wonder what God wants me to do. I don't think it's even on the list for most people. The fourth factor is counsel, and people avoid getting counsel from people they intuitively know are going to disagree with them. Oh, joy. We're just going to do what we want to. And so when we get counsel, usually we are finding people that we intuitively know will already agree with us. And the fifth item here is, are we really open-minded? And the answer is hardly. Nobody's really open-minded. Nobody. This is a human malady that is true of all of us. And it's something that we have to face, especially when we have the responsibility of making huge life-changing decisions on not just ourselves, but people that we are in our families and people that we do business with and people at church and friends, extended family. It's important to know these elements about ourselves if we're going to really make wise decisions. Hosea 11:7 says, "My people are determined to turn from me." That's our problem. We know better. That's built into us. "Even though they call me God Most High, I will by no means exalt them." And in John 1, Jesus came to his own people, and his own people received him not. Jesus didn't fit the narrative of the people who lived in his own hometown, and so they dismissed him. The narrative in our culture today is king. Go on social media, everybody has a narrative of how they want life to be. And they will go to the ends of the earth and justify anything they want to do as long as their narrative they can hold on to. And sometimes that creates terrible decisions that have awful consequences for people. Well, the passage finishes back with Abraham, verse 14 on the back of your handout. "The Lord said to Abraham, after Lot had parted from him, 'Look around,'" similar to what Lot did. Lifted up his eyes. He looked around. Lot had gone off to the east, where he was most enamored. Look what God says. "Look around from where you are to the north, to the south, to the east," where Lot went, "and to the west. All that land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go, walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I'm giving it to you." Well, Lot was going to occupy the east side, at least for a while. But eventually he would lose the very thing he had a grip on. He thought he had to have. Verse 16, God continues, "I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth. If anyone could count the dust, your offspring could be counted. Go walk through the land. I'm giving it to you." And the thing that strikes me is something that's really true about life. The thing that Abraham gave up to God, which was the choice about where to have pasture land, God gave back to him that land and more. What Lot thought he had to have and grasped, he ended up losing. This principle happens in people's lives a lot. Grab for what you think you have to have, and for a while you think, "Oh, I've got my treasure right here," whatever that treasure happens to be. But then when the consequences come rolling in, regret starts coming in. And when we give to God what we want, we would like to have, but we give that to him, then God, you are able to keep and to hold and to give me whatever it is you think I need, then God says, "I like that." And he finds ways to do what he did here with Abraham, with us. C.S. Lewis understood this reality about God as he deals with people. I'd like to read some excerpts from several of his books. He wrote, "There are only two kinds of people in the end, like Lot and Abraham. Those who say to God, 'Thy will be done,' Abraham, and those to whom God says in the end, 'Thy will be done,' Lot. All that are in hell choose it. Without that self-choice, there could be no hell. No soul that seriously and constantly desires joy will ever miss it. Those who seek find, those who knock it is opened." This is true. Then he said, "Son," he said in one of the books, "you cannot in your present state understand eternity. That is what mortals misunderstand. They say of some temporal suffering, no further bliss can make up for it, not knowing that heaven, once attained, will work backwards and turn even that agony into a glory. And of some sinful pleasure, they say, 'Let me have but this, and I'll take the consequences,' little dreaming how damnation will spread back and back into their past and contaminate the pleasure of the sin. Both processes begin even before death. It is an amazing observation, both about God and our human nature. We have choices to make. Wise choices or foolish choices. We will grasp what we think we need, and there are consequences coming down the pike. Or we will give to God what we have and allow Him to be sovereign in our life, and then enjoy whatever He chooses to give back to us. And then in the Joyful Christian book, the last sentence he wrote that I'll read: aim at heaven and you will get earth thrown in, like Abraham. Aim at earth and you will get neither. This is illustrated today in our story, and you'll see this played out over the next few weeks as we continue with Abraham and Lot. Verse 18. Abraham went to live near the great trees of Mamre, which means fullness, at Hebron. He pitched his tents, and there he built an altar to the Lord. He reminded himself and centered himself around God and what mattered, the things of God. Now, the cross is our version of an altar. This is the place where we are centered and where we find a power to deal with our human nature that used to be completely lost, to do something different in us. We finished with Abraham and Lot. And when I think about this, I think about our third banner over here, where it says, seek God's direction. This is what was missing from Lot. It was what was missing from Abraham when he went to Egypt, but he learned the lesson when he came back, a chastened man. And so as we finish this, I want you just to think for a moment. As best you can, with God's help, do you tend to lean more towards Abraham or Lot? When you make decisions, some big decisions, what considerations are most important to you? Those considerations will drive you in one direction or the other. And the consequences of foolish decisions may not show up for years, like with Lot. But eventually, they come back to bite, and they bite hard. Lots of regret, lots of brokenness and misery. The other one is we come to worship God. God, I'm a mess. Left to myself, please don't leave me to myself. That's a bad idea. I have learned that. I need your wisdom and your strength and your perspective. I need my version of the tent and the altar every day of my life. And so do you. Let's pray together. Father, I'm aware that unless you crack open our hearts and bring some melting where our hearts are hard, and unless you open up our either blind eyes or severely scaled eyes, we will not see what you want us to see. We will not do what you want us to do. We will scamper off to our excuses and to what our desires say and our feelings, and we will do same old about decisions. But we can be Abraham on his way back from Egypt, who had been severely chastened by Pharaoh and humbled in a way that helped him to be able to make wise decisions that had long-term impact that has gone on for thousands of years down into today. We'll look at that in the next few weeks. Help the folks that are Lot in the room to turn away from Lotness, and turn to Abraham and his example. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.